welcome back to the Fiercely Fueled podcast. I am here with one of our super awesome Fiercely Fueled nutrition coaches, Michelle Carlson. Welcome, Michelle.
Thank you for having me, Kristen.
Yeah, I'm super excited that you're here. So for those that don't know you, I'm going to give a little intro because I think that you are pretty awesome. So Michelle is 51 years old, about to compete in her first international powerlifting meet, and has been vegan for 13 years, and has like a couple of things that I think a lot of people assume are automatically going to hinder strength. So age, being vegan, and also menopausal, right? So these are all things I think people really think are going to affect strength, and they're things that need to be considered and worked around. But I think that's what gives you such an advantage as a nutrition coach, is understanding how all of these things play together. So I'm really excited to have you here and talk about some of this stuff.
Thank you. Just kind words.
So one of the things that we talked about, actually, when I interviewed you about joining our team, I think you brought this up, was that a lot of people, so we know a lot of people think that the hardest part about incorporating more plants into their diet and more plant-based protein, whether they're just kind of dabbling in consuming less animal products and getting more protein and nutrients from plant, or if they're going full vegan, a lot of people are like, well, now this is going to completely mess up my macros. Like, where do I get protein from? But you told me something really interesting, was that protein really wasn't the difficult one for you. It was, how do you not eat like tons of carbs and still support your goal? And I think that's another misconception people have about a plant-based diet, is that essentially all of your macronutrients are going to come from carbohydrates.
Yeah. When I became plant-based or vegan, protein really wasn't the issue. It was about educating myself around which foods were going to work the best in helping me meet my macros and help me perform my best. So it became more about not getting enough protein, but how to set my diet up. And there was kind of a little bit of a learning curve around that. And once I got over that learning curve, meeting my macros, hitting my protein, hitting my carbohydrates and fats weren't a problem. So yeah, it's just all about understanding and learning and sort of setting yourself up on the front end to be successful on the nutritional plan side.
So what are some tips that you figured out and recommend to people when they're making this transition and want to be mindful of their macros? Like, what are some things that were the biggest learning curves for you, and how did you overcome that?
Well, so first was researching and learning about the different plant-based foods, and their makeup was really a big thing for me. When I first started the journey into becoming a vegan, I didn't know a lot about it, and I didn't necessarily track, but I had to do that when I started lifting. So I had some, pretty good knowledge, but then once I started lifting and becoming a nutrition coach and strength coach, I just began a deep dive into foods. I began those kinds of foods. I began tracking and reading and understanding. So that would sort of be tip number one, is educate yourself in terms of what foods are going to be appropriate to fuel you both in a healthy way, but towards your goals. The other thing I thought for me was helpful was tracking. That helped me understand a lot. Also understanding my plant-based protein sources was really big. So the whole thing comes in as, well, you can't get enough protein on a plant-based diet. But if you understand what your main protein sources are, you can leverage those in your nutrition plan and meet your macro goals. So for example, for me, I focus around plant-based proteins that are higher in protein but lower in carbohydrates. And those tend to be your plant-based sources such as tofu, seitan, tempeh. I make those sort of my main sources because those are the highest in proteins, and then I build around those. My other macros, my fats, and my carbohydrates. So if you focus your meals around the higher plant-based proteins, there are going to be some carbohydrates in there, but they're going to be a lot less. So you can expand it in other directions with your different carbohydrates. So you aren't just eating all like rice and lentils and things like that, or an excessive amount of them.
What do you think? So, okay, so protein and carbohydrates get talked a lot about, and then fats kind of get overlooked, but are still really important. And so, what is your main source of fats in your diet? Because obviously, if you're not eating animal products, that cuts out a lot of dietary fat, probably a lot of dietary fat that people need to cut out anyway. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me, what is your main fat source then in your diet? Like, what are kind of the staples for your fat source? So you were talking about your staples for your protein, but what are your staples for your fat sources?
So I'm huge on a varied diet, which I think is important for anybody on any diet, but especially with a plant-based diet. So just like, veggies and, my main protein sources, I really try and vary my fat sources. So I do a lot of nuts and seeds, and my seeds include chia and flax, nut butters, olive oil, avocado, edamame, and tofu, and even tempeh has some fat in them. So you're getting some fat there from those. Olives, I will have olives a lot. So I really just try and each week or every couple of weeks, I really try and focus on different fats. So I'm hitting like different nutrients and things like that, and not eating the same things. But those would be my primary fat sources.
Do you think that it was the figuring out of the carbohydrates was the hardest part when you went plant-based, or another question, I guess, would be in terms of the clients that you work with, where do you feel like the biggest struggle is for them with meeting and managing their macros on a plant-based diet?
Honestly, I would have to say it's more about the protein. I don't think it's going to be as difficult for somebody who is just looking to eat plant-based. Maybe once a week or a couple nights a week. But because you're including also protein from animal sources. But if you're fully plant-based, it becomes a bit more of a challenge, I find, for clients. Just because if you're not used to it, you have to learn a whole new skill in terms of prepping your protein. And while someone like me who's been doing it for a long time might say, "Oh, it's easy, just it's a blank slate as chicken would be," but it tends to be a little bit more overwhelming. And I notice clients seem to struggle more on the protein end of it than anywhere else. And it's not that they can't get enough; it's just more about, I think, there's a little bit more, I hate to say, complication or challenge around it, and it's not quite as straightforward than if you were just doing straight like animal protein.
So one of the things too that I think there's this kind of growing trend, which is one reason why I wanted to bring you on board, because I've seen this change in the nutrition industry firsthand, is a lot more people, for whatever reason, deciding to incorporate a more plant-based diet. When I say that, I mean reduce their consumption of animal products. And so I think there was the what was the documentary that came out that like got everyone really, really worked up over the health of consuming animals? Do you remember the name of that documentary? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I can't remember the name of it. No, but I've seen it. It's been a long time.
So that was like,
I think I've seen all of them.
yeah, that was one thing I think got it. That was one that got people really worked up about the health of it. But the really, right. But really the trend that I have seen over the last 10 years is, and I think this is the category you fall into is the ethical reasons for not wanting to consume animals. And I think that that's just a growing population of people that fall into that category. And so obviously, if that population of the world is growing, then that means that that population of lifters is growing as well. So we're having this people that are starting to feel like, I don't want to consume quite so many animals, or people that are just going full vegan and also eliminating the usage of any animal products in terms of, not buying leather products and things like that. But so what special considerations do you think someone needs to take into account who's a lifter, who's saying, I want to reduce the amount of animal products I consume, or they just want to go full vegan? What do you think they need to consider and think about that maybe someone who's consuming animal protein doesn't think about?
I think that for me, there's a handful of them. So there's some things that are a little bit more difficult to get on a plant-based diet. B12 is one of them, as well as omega-3, because that generally comes from fish. So paying attention to those, especially, I think it becomes more of an issue if you decide to become fully plant-based or vegan, is really understanding that there are foods that you can focus on in your diet to help with that. So being mindful, it's like, okay, well, I know I might not be getting as much of this if I were on a different diet. So I need to really pay attention to that in this diet. So, and that's something I do with my diet. I make sure I'm eating foods that have B12 and I take an extra omega supplement. I'm not advocating that for anybody, but I just do that in addition to food because I find that that's what works for me. So there's those things. Also, the other thing is essential amino acids in plant-based proteins tend to be lower than in animal-based proteins. So you want to be aware of that, especially if you're lifting. You want to make sure that your amino acid profile is as strong as it can be. So you definitely want to be including foods that tend to be on the higher side of those. So tempeh and tofu, edamame, lentils are some of the plant proteins that are stronger in that. So if you're a lifter and you're trying to get strong and get stronger, eating just beans and veggies, things like that, probably is not going to be enough. And especially if your protein requirement is a little bit higher. So you want to make sure that those higher protein sources are part of your nutritional plan. And because plant-based proteins tend to be less anabolic than animal proteins due to digestibility, optimizing, making sure you're optimizing your amino acid profile through different foods, and also potentially increasing protein intake a little bit above what it would be otherwise. So, and there's different suggestions for that in terms of how much. I think it just kind of depends on where your protein for your diet falls. So that is another consideration. And then the other thing to think about too is plant-based proteins such as tofu and edamame tend to have just per serving less protein than, say, like a serving of chicken, like a 3-ounce serving of chicken. I think the last time I looked, a 3-ounce serving of chicken has like, or a chicken breast has around 25 grams of protein, whereas with tempeh, depending on the brand, it can be anywhere from like 15 to 19 grams. So you have to consume a bit more to get the same amount, which means calories will be a little bit higher. So that's something else to think about as well. You might be eating a little bit more, and that food and plant-based foods sometimes take a little bit longer to digest. The last thing is I've noticed, and I've noticed this personally, is I tended to, when I went vegan, I was hungrier than I was when I wasn't. And I've heard a lot of people, and this is sort of anecdotal. I haven't ever done a study on it or anything, but when you go plant-based, you tend to be a little bit more hungry than if you weren't. So that's, if you notice that, it could be calories, it could be needing more food, but also, could be just the response to a changing diet, or if it's a full shift or even just a couple meals a week, I suppose you could notice some change in hunger levels around that. So I think those are some of the key takeaways or considerations for me that I think are important for people interested in either going fully plant-based or just having a few more meals a week.
What is your stance on fake meats like Beyond Burger? And I think there's another, like, is it Corn? Is that how you say it? QU?
Yeah, there's a lot of them now. There's a lot of them now. Yeah, so the meat analogs, there's like Impossible, Beyond, Tofurkey, Field Rose. I personally, I eat them. I eat them in moderation, though. They are not like the cornerstone of my diet by any means. Sometimes on the weekend, I'll have an Impossible Burger, just a fun meal, with my family. Or I may include some, once in a while, I'll have some Impossible if I'm making a spaghetti sauce in a weekly meal prep. But it's not sort of the main part of my diet. I tend to lean more towards other main protein sources. Reason being is, those meat analogs tend to be quite a bit higher in sodium. They're higher in fat. They're super processed and just not the best for everyday eating. And I think just in general, whether you're an athlete or for health reasons, it's kind of like the equivalent of eating super high fatty, beef or something. So, I mean, they're made up of different things, but health-wise. So I lean in more on and recommend clients lean in more on tofu and tempeh, where tofu is made from soybean curd and tempeh is fermented. So they tend to have more health benefits. And they're less in sodium. The fat isn't as high. They oftentimes will be set in calcium, like tofu, which is great. I mean, you can still get decent calcium from tofu, even if even if it's not set in calcium. There's still, a decent amount in it, and they're a lot less expensive than a lot of the meat, the veggie meats. So, I just say they're fine, just moderation, just like anything. Just, you want to eat healthy and choose healthy options most of the time.
Right. Well, it's okay. So, like, if we get down to it, Oreos are vegan. And like, right. We can't just only eat Oreos, right? So we need, and there's definitely, right. There's definitely, I mean, just as there's people who consume animal products that are, their diets are high in like junk food type stuff. We just have to be cautious that making that switch or incorporating more plant-based foods. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's fine to have some of these foods that are of lesser quality, but ultimately we want high quality
Yeah,
foods in our diet, no matter if you're consuming animal products or not.
exactly. And I think that for me anyway, the key to just a good diet, whether I would be an athlete, or not, is just that there's, again, like you said, balance there. And, it's not restrictive.
So what do you utilize protein powder? And if you do,
Oh,
which I think you do actually, because you turned me on to a brand that I really like, but tell me about your protein powder.
I do use protein powder. I try and limit it to once a day. So again, depending on your protein requirement and calories and things like that, this could look different for different people. But I don't keep my protein super high. So sometimes I don't even use it. If I do, it's once a day. I may have a protein shake or I may put it in my oats. But I really feel, um, regardless of diet, and on my diet, that consuming whole foods is really important. So you get as many nutrients and different nutrients as possible. And it's all coming from whole food sources, and especially protein. So I think it's fine. But again, like veggie meats and Oreos, not the sort of the main part of the diet, not the dominant part of the diet.
Right. You turned me on to a company that we are not sponsored by this company at all. And I think that it's only available in the United States, but True Nutrition is the company you turned me on to, because you can
Yes.
develop your own blends of protein. And so
Mm-hmm.
I recently discovered that even though I've been getting lactose free whey protein, I can no longer tolerate it. My gut just does not want whey protein in it. So I switched to a blend that I make myself through True Nutrition that's 45% pea and 55% rice. There's actually some really cool research about that as a blend. And then I just added in some
Oh,
extra essential amino acids just in case to cover me. And you told me about
yep.
their is it strawberry banana shake flavor? So good. It's so good.
Yeah, that one is really good. That's one of my favorite.
I've been using that with dextrose as a intra training nutrition, or pre training if it's like my schedule's been a little bit weird lately, and so I'll eat and then maybe not get to train when I thought I was going to train. So then I just have some of that protein with dextrose right before I train and then into my training. But at any rate, my point is that I have not noticed any difference in my ability to recover or put on muscle. And I've put on a significant amount of muscle in the last several months, just since I've been doing this. So I definitely think that we overblow this whole, you have to have, number one, you have to have protein powder, but number two, it has to be animal protein. Otherwise it's, not going to help you build muscle. And I think it just takes some knowledge to be able to do it.
Exactly. And yeah, understanding, the food, the composition of food, understanding, the role of amino acids in in protein, and how that helps you. I, so um and utilizing that knowledge in a way that helps you optimize your performance. So yeah, just again, I think I mentioned this earlier. It's like more, got to spend a little bit more time on the front end. I mean, like with anything new, can be a bit of a learning curve, or I can just help you with that.
Yeah, exactly. Come work with Michelle. This is what she is super good at, is helping lifters. I mean, you work with lifters who, I mean, I know that you work with some lifters who aren't vegan or plant-based, but but working with a plant-based strength athlete, that is your jam, and helping people navigate that and figure it out. Because as you said, you kind of just had to do it all yourself, and there was a massive learning curve, and there's definitely something to be said about borrowing someone's expertise and having them, give you a little shortcut to it and say like, hey, let me show you all the things that I learned in going through this process, so you don't have to take quite so long to learn it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I continue to learn things all the time, and research continues to change. And so there's just a lot of information yet that we still don't know. So in this area, especially when it comes to strength athletes, I know there's been some good research for endurance athletes and a little bit on strength athletes, but I think there's still quite a bit of room to grow in that.
I totally agree. So one thing as you were talking made me think is that we have a free resource for anyone who's looking for some plant-based, like higher protein plant-based recipes. We have a free recipe book for that. So I'll make sure that we link that in our show notes in case you guys are interested in just even, I know that Coach Pia for Fiercely Fueled loves this recipe book just because it gives her more ideas of how to just incorporate more vegetables into her diet, even though she's not plant-based. But so we'll definitely link that resource in the show notes for people that are interested in that. And hold up, if people want to follow you in your lifting journey online, can they follow you on Instagram?
I am on Instagram. It's Michelle Carlson _ PB coach.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Michelle. I'm super excited to have you back on the podcast after your first international meet, to hear all about it and just talk about some needs of female athletes that are like you, which is also a growing population of people. So thanks for coming on. And I'm just really excited that you're on our team and that we've got this plant-based specialist to really help out these strength athletes. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Kristen. Loved being here.
If you like the show, I'd like to invite you to subscribe to my free email newsletter at guide.fiercelyfueled.com/podcast. In addition to updates, articles, and behind the scenes tips from my team and I, my email newsletter subscribers also get my pre and post training meals guide to help you position yourself to get stronger faster than you ever thought possible. You can get it all for free at guide.fiercelyfueled.com/podcast. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Fiercely Fueled Nutrition. And lastly, this show is meant to make the strength world a better, stronger, and healthier place. Please share it with your friends and subscribe to the show.